Welcome to a very special media condition of RiverCity-Media, also the Marion Messenger. I forgot what channel I was on, David. Have you ever done that? You forget which channel you're on and
we could do a whole show on my mistakes.
Well, welcome to a very special edition of RiverCity-Media here on the Marion Messenger. Our special guest, Mr. David Carroll. Very, very welcome to have you, sir. Pleasure to actually meet you video-wise.
Yeah, I hope to meet you in person someday.
Sure. I love the concept of the book. Let's get straight into it.
Sure.
34 years sitting at the anchor desk.
Mm-hmm.
Was this book an offshoot of what you do for a living?
I guess it was. I started writing books, I guess about 10 years ago. I did one called Chattanooga Radio and Television, which was a pictorial history of local broadcasting. And from that, going around promoting the books to different clubs and groups, I decided to write a column every week, which is in several newspapers, including over in Marion County. And so since, I guess, the first book, every 5 years, I've come out with a new book. And this one is by far the biggest one. But I think it blends my love of history with entertainment and politics, because the book is the first, to my knowledge, to be written that has a detailed listing and stories about the famous people who visited not just Chattanooga, but the surrounding area. And so that was something I guess I never planned for. This book was originally supposed to be a history of Memorial Auditorium, was the seed, I guess, that got planted. And once I started doing the auditorium, I started picking up little facts about the Tivoli and Lake Winnie and River Bend and presidents who visited and all that. And I just decided every time I came to a different junction, I couldn't stop. It was like, well, I've got to include athletes, and I've got to include military figures, and I've got to include presidents, movies, movie stars, movies that were filmed here. And it became much bigger than I really intended, but I'm very happy with the result.
So was there things that you had heard of prior to entering the news business that you discovered maybe was some truth? I've always heard of a James Brown visit during a riot. Was there something that just in the entertainment field that caught you by surprise?
Yeah, a lot of things by surprise. I don't know for sure about James Brown being here during a riot. I can tell you he was here a lot. Back in the 60s and 70s, he was here at least once a year, sometimes more. Probably the ones that stand out as far as things that I just didn't know, and many of it happened, of course, before my time, because we're going back to 1900 to the present day. But I didn't know that Frank Sinatra appeared on the stage of the Memorial Auditorium long before he was famous. He was about 23 years old. Nobody knew who he was. I didn't know that so many superstar baseball players played on the field at Ingle Stadium in Chattanooga. A lot of people know the story of how this young lady named Jackie Mitchell struck out Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig in 1931 at Ingle Stadium during an exhibition game. And, we don't know how much of that is truth, how much of that is legend. I mean, she did strike them out. Did they strike out swinging? Did they strike out intentionally? I don't know, but it became a great story. But I didn't know how many other superstar baseball players from every major team of the 30s, 40s, and 50s stopped at Ingle Stadium on their way back from spring training in Florida. There were no major league teams on the West Coast at that time, and everybody trained in Florida. And Chattanooga, of course, was a major hub, a railroad stop between Florida and anywhere points north. So every year around the 1st of April, all the major league teams, all of them you can name, Cardinals, Red Sox, Yankees, Dodgers, the Cubs, they all played at Ingle Stadium. So you name a baseball player of that era, DiMaggio, Ted Williams, Jackie Robinson, Willie Mays, Duke Snyder, they all played in Chattanooga. And I did not know that until I did the research for this book.
So that was the most outstanding thing to me was, how did you do the research for this book? It seems you got to go to some sources outside the beaten path.
Yeah, it was it was quite a job. I think I went into it thinking it was easier than it was. And then it's kind of like that old 70s song, once you get to a certain point, it's too late to turn back now. And I couldn't turn back or stop halfway or 70%. The very first endeavor that I went out on like this was documenting all the shows that played the UTC arena. I did that for my website 6 or 7 years ago, and it was very easy. I think there were some arguments online about, when was Aerosmith there or who opened for Def Leppard or something. And nobody knew, or everybody was coming up with different ideas. So I contacted the former manager of the arena and I just said, is there any record? And he's emailed me this spreadsheet covering 30 years within 5 minutes. It was like that. And I cut and pasted and put it on my website, and everybody's going, yay, David, you're an amazing person. And whenever I get praised for doing something that, didn't require any work, that's pretty cool. And I thought they would all be that easy, and none of them were. With Memorial Auditorium, there were, first off, it took a few years to find them, but there were about 8 thick ledgers that had handwritten records of all the shows that played the auditorium in Tivoli from the 1920s. However, there were a lot of gaps. A couple of books were lost, or perhaps there was a change in personnel at some point and some people didn't record certain shows. So those records were incomplete. A lot of the other venues didn't really keep good records. Lake Winnie was one of them, just that they'd have some, miss some. So in many cases, I had to go to newspaper archives. In other cases, I went to either promoters or families of promoters to see if they had, say, for instance, if a promoter who was very active in the 60s booking shows, if they had passed on since then, sometimes their families, would find their records and send them to me. So it was a variety of sources, but it was hard. And probably looking through newspaper records was the most time consuming, and it certainly, wear out my eyes from time to time, because there would be a record in the Memorial Auditorium ledger that might say, January 15th, 1965, WDOD shower of country stars. Well, who was there?
Right.
For a long time, I did not know, and there was no way to find out. So that's when you have to go to newspaper archives day to day to see the ads or the reviews, stories written about it. And finally, I was able to piece all those together and name all the names of all the shows. So it was a chore, but I'm glad I went through it.
So we'd be remiss if we didn't discuss the venues in Chattanooga and how, I love the history of this city. It's one of my passions too, but we have such an eclectic group of venues, from the Tivoli to the Memorial Auditorium, even the UTC Arena, especially when it opened, really brought in national acts. Do you think this great, wonderful selection of venues gets everybody on their way up, on their way down? We get them all at some point.
Most of them, we never got the Beatles. We never got the Stones. There were some big superstar acts, ABBA, different people who were world dominating acts at their peak did not play here. The Bee Gees, for example, we got once back in the 60s when they were pretty well known.
Right.
And twice, I think, in the 70s, just before they hit it big with Saturday Night Fever. I mean, the Bee Gees were always a big act, but after Saturday Night Fever, of course, they were monstrous. We never got Elvis on a stage here. He actually passed through and spent the night here a couple times, but never got him on stage. It varies from decade to decade. For instance, if you go back to the earliest parts of the book in the early 1900s, and when the auditorium and Tivoli were built, both in the 1920s, we had a run there of about a decade when we got pretty much anybody we wanted, because those theaters were new, they were a good size. And again, Chattanooga being a railroad hub at that time, we were fortunate enough to get people, frankly, who were on their way to and from somewhere else. And hey, let's stop and make some money in Chattanooga while we can. Things started slowing down around the 1950s when television came along. And that was not just here, it was nationwide. A lot of people were fascinated by that new box in their living room, and rightfully said, why should I pay $25, not $25. Why should I pay $5, $10 to see Doris Day when she's right there on my free television? So during that period, things like gospel music, roller derby, and professional wrestling kept the auditorium open. There were people in town who wanted to shut it down. They felt it had outlived its usefulness. The Tivoli largely served at that time as a showcase for the arts, for our local opera, symphony guild, school groups, that sort of thing. And then in the 60s, it shut down live performances to become a movie theater. Meanwhile, the auditorium had a bit of a revival in the 60s, and that's when we get into the period you're talking about, where the multi-act shows like the Jet Fly Spectaculars and the Country Station Shindigs would bring in, a stage full of top 40 current hits artists or Grand Ole Opry artists from Nashville. And then when the arena came along in the 80s, it was a little bit ahead of its time for this region with 11,000 seats. And suddenly we could bring in the acts like Van Halen, Kenny Rogers, and others that had sort of outgrown the 4,000 seat auditorium. Sadly, we move into the current era where some of the cities around us have kind of outbuilt us when it comes to a large arena. When you go to the Phillips Arena in Atlanta, or you go to the Bridgestone Arena in Nashville, those places were built largely for concerts, where the arena is obviously a basketball facility. And they built, say, with 16, 17,000 fans in mind. So if a superstar group wants to come to our region now, they bypass us and go to Atlanta, Nashville, Murfreesboro, places with newer and more artist-friendly venues. So we've gone through a lot of changes in the decades, but other than a few of those major superstar acts that I mentioned, most of the big ones have played here, and especially in country music. Our proximity to Nashville, pretty much anybody who's ever had a top 5 country hit has played here, either on the way up, or while they're at the top, or on the way down.
Yeah, I'm a big rock guy, and I was privileged to see Cliff Burton of Metallica prior to his passing, which is, in my world, a great honor. So it's something, the arena, when it first opened up, was a mecca for rock and roll in this area. And I think sometimes the festival seating also have hurt some of the arena acts, but that's Absolutely. For another time. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that probably the one of the things that hurt the arena as years went by was that many acts that are very meticulous about sound played there once and never came back. In many cases, artists who were doing acoustic shows or more how do I put this? I guess songs that require some intimacy didn't like the acoustics and the echoes and frankly the chatter among the crowd that could be heard. It was just it is a good place for a rock show. It's a good place for monster trucks and wrestling and game shows and things like that, but it just wasn't quite built as a good concert place for certain shows, and that hurt in some ways.
And that's the reason the Tivoli, with its intimate setting, its great acoustic, to hear an acoustic set in the Tivoli is a pleasure unto itself to me. A couple of guitar singer-songwriter shows I have seen, it's been absolutely a venue that blew me away. So I could talk music all day. It's passion of mine. But you said politics. And in my head, I knew of 2 presidents that had visited Chattanooga. I went to my favorite thing, Google, put in presidential visits, Chattanooga. I was outstanding. I was like, I think I came up with 20 or so. And how many 27. Oh, wow. Mm-hmm. Tell us about one that might be a little off the beaten path.
I'm like you. I mean, I had heard, and of course, lived through several who've come here in my lifetime. And when I started doing the research on how many presidents had come here, I decided not to limit it to people who came here during their presidency. I also wanted to cover people who came here before they were president, people who came here after they were president. So when you include all those, it's 27 and counting, and that's right up to Biden. Now, Biden has not been here during his presidency, But for instance, until I did the book, I didn't realize that his first visit here was about 45 years ago. He was a 33-year-old first-term senator from Delaware, and he spoke to the downtown Rotary Club. So this goes back to about the late 70s, somewhere in that range. And he was here in 2015 after the terrorist attack on our servicemen here. Pretty much every president of, say, the last 50 years has visited here, except Bill Clinton. Don't know why, just we didn't quite make his itinerary. But, Jimmy Carter has been here a ton of times. Richard Nixon was here when he was quite young, back in the 50s, before he became president, and then as he was campaigning a couple of times. FDR was here to dedicate the Chickamauga Dam in 1940. And, that was another one of those situations where his disabilities were largely hidden from the public because he pretty much spoke from his car and was I suppose got some assistance in standing, from his car and speaking to the crowd. And there were several that were hard to track down and some that were impossible to track down. Like I kept hearing that Harry Truman stopped here often on his way back from vacations, going back to his home state of Missouri. And I can't confirm that. I called the Presidential Museum for Harry Truman, and they said if he ever was in Chattanooga, they don't know it. He may have stopped to fill up with gas or may have stopped to, grab something at the store. We'll never know. So some things couldn't be confirmed. But Teddy Roosevelt was here a number of times back around the turn of the century, both before, during, and after his presidency, and quite a few in the 1800s. Some who came here when they were president, others who were serving in the military. Dwight Eisenhower was never here during his term as president, but he was here when he was a soldier, many, many years before his presidency. So 27 in all, and considering that we're here in the Deep South and we're not Nashville, not Atlanta, that's a pretty good number.
Is there the rumor has always been, and when I guess his history book says that Ulysses S. Grant took control of the Union Army here. Were you able to confirm that, or have you heard that before?
Off the top of my head, I can't tell you. I know he was here, and I think there's even a picture. I can't remember the exact event or what he may have had command of at the time. I'd have to look at the book, and I don't have one with me right now. But he was here for sure.
One of the most, I guess, the one that sticks in my head was Ronald Reagan's visit to the graduation ceremony of multiple high schools. Mm-hmm. That was a little bit of a unique event in itself.
Yeah, he was here in May of 1987, UTC Arena. And Tom Griscom was one of his top advisors at that time. And Tom is a Chattanooga native and current resident who helped me a lot with that part of the story. And I don't remember exactly how it came to be that he spoke to all the Hamilton County graduating classes. But that was a cool event. And, everybody in that class of 87 can say something about their graduation that the rest of us can't say. Who spoke at your graduation? This guy, that guy. Who spoke at yours? President Reagan. That's a pretty cool thing to be able to say. And it was a special event. Around that time, most of the TV stations, like my own, had live units, live truck broadcasting capability. So we were able to carry it live, and everybody could attend, by watching TV. I remember one of the little side notes to that story. I believe Tom Griscom had told him that while he was in Chattanooga, he should eat some Crystal cheeseburgers. And so Crystal made it a point to, heat up and cook some Crystal cheeseburgers and pack them very securely and send them back to Washington with the president on Air Force One. So I guess that was his in-flight meal on the way back.
That is an excellent story. Before we move on to movies and TVs, I did have one other question. Are we the only city to hold an NFL Hall of Fame induction that I know of? Terrell Owens a couple of years ago. I believe that might have been a one-of-a-kind situation. May
have been, and I probably read something about that at the time. That event is in the book. I don't know that I said it was the only one ever held, in a hometown. And, it was unusual, and I don't know that it was ideal. I think Terrell Owens did that as kind of his own little personal statement or protest, as it may be.
Right.
Nice event. I mean, they did it upright and did it at the arena. So I can't say for sure that we're the only one, but I'd say there can't be many others.
So let's move on to movies and TVs that's been filmed here. The two that I naturally go to is I'm a huge fan of 42.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm just the age that I grew up with a crush on Christy McNichol,
Mm-hmm.
like everybody my age did. So the filming of The Nights the Lights Went Out in Georgia here locally was near and dear to my heart. Have there been other films that's been filmed here?
I think if my count is correct, it was around 15 in all, and a lot of this dates back, I think, maybe to the 40s. There was one filmed in the Fort Oglethorpe area in the 50s. There was a Disney movie filmed near Baylor School with Fess Parker. Walt Disney actually came to Chattanooga to, I guess, kind of oversee the filming one day, and thought he was doing it secretly. And I guess word got out somehow, and a reporter met him as soon as he got off the plane. And Walt Disney was like, how did you know I was coming? And, the reporter's like, well, I'm a reporter. I have sources. But supposedly Walt Disney was not thrilled that he was getting some attention here. So yeah, dating back to the 40s, it adds up to about 15. It's not an extraordinary number considering our scenery. And I think at various times over the years, we have promoted and recruited better than we have others. And some states, Georgia in particular, seem to have made it more attractive for people to come film with tax breaks and such. And maybe they've been more aggressive at landing some Hollywood films. But we've had some good ones made here. Of course, I'm like you. It's hard to beat 42. We've had some music videos shot here at Ingle Stadium, on Walnut Street Bridge, various other locations. Tim McGraw shot one, not that long ago. Truck, yeah. So, we tried to document all those too. And as far as I know, we've got them all in the book.
And of course, Alabama, our friends from Fort Payne shot at Ingle Stadium at one point. The book available at your website, Chattanooga RadioTV.com. Also, my eye was caught by another book on there, Volunteer Bulldog Tide.
Volunteer Bama Dog.
Bama Dog.
That's the one I wrote 5 years ago, and it's primarily a collection of the columns that people have liked over the years in the newspapers. And the title, and I guess this is my fault, some people feel like or think maybe it's about sports, and there are some sports, stories in there. But the title actually comes from that spot near Nickajack that you can stand in Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee at the same time. A lot of people aren't aware of that. And I wrote a column about it and then included it in the book, and have given directions either personally or via the column and book dozens of times over the years. Sometimes I wish I'd set up a concession stand there. But, it's kind of it's only about 10 minutes as the crow flies from where I grew up. And yet it was only about 6 years ago that I actually stepped foot there for the first time and found the marker and stood there. And that's what inspired me to write that, is just, I love all these three states, and grew up in Alabama, worked in Tennessee now for decades, and have made that, trip between the two, stopping in Georgia a zillion times. And I love something about all three states, and I'm very proud of these three states. And it's just a really cool feeling to stand on that spot and get that little rush of being a volunteer Bama Dog.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did you, like my friend Duke Ralston, who actually set this up for me, which I'm indebted to, he has a show called Tennessee Macabre that's on Outer Worlds TV. And to me, it is a love message to Dr. Shock in the 1970s. Were there any inclusion of such original local programming into the book?
In this book, not as much. Now, in my first book, Chattanooga Radio and Television, all the greats are pictured and highlighted and featured, and their stories are told, from Luther, who's just the all-time gold standard, to Miss Marcia, Dr. Shock, Bob Brandy, Earl Friedenberg, Tommy Jett. I mean, all of them are featured in that book. And there were stories about some of them in my second book, the columns with Volunteer Bama Dog. Probably more of a highlight in this one. I didn't want to just include famous people who had visited here. I thought it was also important to include people who grew up here, who became famous, still live here or visit here. You know, everybody from Bessie Smith, whom the Bessie Smith Hall is named, all the way through Hugh Beaumont, who played Ward Cleaver on Leave It to Beaver back in the 50s. He attended school here. Dennis
UTC
Haskins.
graduate.
Yeah. Dennis Haskins, who went to Notre Dame and became famous on Saved by the Bell, used to visit here quite often. Kane Brown, Lauren Elena, you know, these current stars who grew up here and have now become worldwide music superstars. Usher, you know, the list goes on and on. We have, you know, raised and nurtured a pretty good hometown crew. Leslie Jordan, who's on all these TV shows. I'm leaving people out, I know, but I thought it was important to include them. And of course, Alabama, there's a whole story about them too, because they're nearby. Danny Shirley with Confederate Railroad. So I wanted to be sure and include the locals who might now be considered visitors, but who are really hometown folks.
One last question, and thank you for your time. This has been, I could talk for hours, and I do appreciate your time. When I was on the website looking for options to order the book, you had a couple of different options, and you seemed to really personalize the book. Was that a goal of yours when you release your books, or?
You know, I'll say this, and I don't mean to sound conceited or anything, because I'm not. Here's the thing. Every time I've ever bought a book, I go to a bookstore, get a book, and I'm pleased with it. What I learned with the first book, and this is very flattering to me, and I'm very honored about this, it surprised me how many people wanted a book signed by me. I'm very grateful for that. And it's hard to do that when you buy a book from Amazon or when you buy a book in a bookstore. And I'm grateful for people who do, don't get me wrong. But for those people who value a signature by the author, I'm totally grateful for that. It's an honor. And the easiest way for me to do that now, especially with COVID going on and sort of public gatherings limited somewhat, is to do it online. So yes, I've made it on ChattanoogaRadioTV.com, where you can buy any of those books and pay the regular price, obviously plus shipping. And if you, where it says autograph instructions, you know, if you say to my best friend Randall, or to Merry Christmas from Joe, or whatever, I'm glad to sign that. So I'm very grateful. And to be honest, that's not something that I intended in the beginning. But when I learned that that's how people like to buy the books, I'm happy to oblige.
That was something that struck me. I mean, because I do enjoy having a signed author's copy. I was going to wait till the interview was over so that you could just sign it to the thanks for the interview, or to my best friend Randall Works too. You know,
we're best friends now. Absolutely. But yeah,
absolutely.
But that's a nice touch to be able to do. And frankly, the website and the internet has made it easier to pay than it was even 10 years ago, with, you know, PayPal and credit cards and everything accepted on the website. But I like to sell them in person too. And when possible, I love to go to clubs and churches and events and see people one-on-one, show them the book. I love to see their reaction to seeing it. Everybody seems to be blown away by it because it's so big and there's so many pictures. So hopefully, you know, and in Marion County, hopefully we can set something up someday to come do that.
And it seems like this was a true labor of love for you. And it's a great history documentation for the city, and a great, I use your website about the UTC Arena all the time. I was the guy that gave you a bunch of credit, because me and my friends would debate when we saw the bands, and we're like, here, there's the date. There's the date.
Well, and it was a labor of love. I've told my wife many times, as she has stared at the back of my head at this computer while I've worked on it for 4 years. She asked me one day, you know, is this really worth all the trouble? Do people care about all this stuff? And I said, you know, I don't know. I won't know until the book comes out. But I've got to do it. I've got to finish it. I want to do it right. I want it to be something people can keep for decades, long after I'm gone. I want somebody to be able to pick up that book and be thankful that there's a listing of, you know, that Harry Houdini, the magician, played at Memorial Auditorium, or whatever the case may be. So I long ago gave up on the concept that I would recoup my money and time on this book. That's not going to happen. 4 years of, trust me on this, you will not get rich spending 4 years writing a book. But I consider it a gift in the sense that nobody else was doing this. I don't know if anybody else would take 4 years to do it. If they did, God bless them. But I did it, and I'm proud of it, and it gives me great joy to see people enjoy it.
I am going to be thrilled to get a copy in my hand.
Look forward to your reaction.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for sharing it with us. Is there anything you would like to say, where to get it, or any other options?
ChattanoogaRadioTV.com is to get an autographed copy, as we talked about. It is available on Amazon. It is available, if not now, very soon in the major bookstores. So it's just like a real published book. It's out there for people to buy however they choose to do so. I'm kind of grateful for the timing. I've heard many people say that they are buy one for themselves, buying 2 or 3 more for Christmas presents. And I hope that people who unwrap it for Christmas will look at it and be happy. I hope it's not one of those books where people unwrap it and say, oh, you shouldn't have. I want them to say, thank you for buying this. So I hope it's something that brings joy to people.
It is a unique piece of Chattanooga history. And that's the one thing that struck me. And you are a treasure to Chattanooga. I enjoy your nightly broadcast, and 34 years at the anchor desk. I don't know if you've ever went around the South, but you've got to be somewhere in that top 10.
There aren't many. So yeah, it's an honor. I work for a great company, Channel 3, WRCB. Wow. I mean, I just hit the lottery. What can I say? I work for a wonderful company that has treated me well, and I wish everybody could say that. I'm very fortunate.
Thank you very much for your time. Everybody get a copy of the book. Mr. David Carroll, thank you very much.
Thank you, Randall.
Thank you.